It has been 3 years since Mobius had entered world peace ever since Robotnik was defeated by the not whole freedom fighters. Ever since then, every culture around the world of Mobius has started to connect it once again. Some of them have actually started doing some trading relationships with other cultures, even the kingdoms, along with, for example, Kingdom of Acorn. Even if the Wolfpack Nation, the two former spies of the secret freedom fighters, the twins by the name Leeta and Lico. Leeta herself was very happy that this world peace had started. It happened that from time to time that she travels around in the part of the world where she lives, and even a few times she had been back to New Metropolis to see her old friends Sonic and Sally, who's now the king and queen of Kingdom of Acorn. Despite this, she sometimes wonders if the living as a farmer is the right living for her. Sometimes she missed those old adventures she had with some of her team members like Silver and but despite that, she do miss her some of her life. But she loves the peace. She doesn't want to be in constant of fearing and worrying about Robotnik would return to have some constant attack around the Mobius, including her home, the Wolfpack Nation. But one day, she gets a letter from Sally, who invites her for a visit to New Metropolis for about a couple of weeks to spend time with her family. And of course, she doesn't even think for a second. She tells the Grand Chief Lupe and her twin sister Lico that she is going to New Metropolis in Kingdom of Acorn to spend some time with her old friends, and both agreed. Even on her way travels there, she ran into even another old friend of hers, Sonia the Hedgehog, who turned out to be Sonic's sister. She had even seen Sonia for at least a number of years, because even during the battles against Robotnik, she and Sonia weren't much in constant contact, despite that she had wanted to do so, but since she is always back then in a after often in some distant missions, either part around the world just to find new allies to be helping in their fight against Robotnik. But now the world peace had entered it about 3 years ago. She had always wanted to reach out to her friend Sonia. But every time she wondered, where has she been? Because every time after the world peace had ended, and had started, she knew that Sonia lived in one place somewhere in the kingdom of Acorn. But when she reached out to another friend who lives there, she was told that Sonia had left and was not even no sure where she had gone to. Because even back then, after Sonia had told Leeta that she wanted to explore the new kingdom of Acorn. She wanted to see her brother and maybe travel around to play music. She was actually good at playing it at the piano and or even keyboards. She traveled around apparently to perform some music for the Mobians to celebrate the world peace started and that Robotnik was gone and that everyone could enjoy the peace for once. But for once, though, on her travel to New Metropolis, she encountered Sonia. Even Sonia, she was really surprised to see her old friend on the train on the way back to New Metropolis. And the funny is, it turned out Sonia was in fact going back to New Metropolis to see her old brother, even despite she had even informed him about this, because she wanted to have it as a big surprise. And when the train later arrived to the new metropolis, both Sonic and Sally were really surprised that they actually got surprised to see Sonia, but they were really happy to see that Leeta had not met her. Even though Leeta herself had become some sort of godmother to Sonic's kids like Sonic Jr. and Sonia, Sally and Sonic named the daughter Sonia after his sister, which she ad- admired. The true reason for that Leeta was called to New Metropolis that they wanted to start some sort of new, some sort of cultural exchange program with Wolfpack Nation. They knew that the wolves preferred not only to be using any sort of technology at all in their home, but they had been offered to do some exchange for some sort of more crops, ability to grow more food than if they needed, if there was any droughts or any floods. Even though that Leda herself was not as the one to make the decisions, but they had offered her the position to be an ambassador to the Wolfpack Nation in New Metropolis. And they had even informed Liu about this idea. And she thought it was a great idea because even though that she has sometimes even noticed Lena sometimes felt lonely and that she wanted to do something else. But Leah herself was not very happy about the idea. That means that she had to do a lot of politics. And the politics was nothing that she had in experience in. And especially, she wasn't even like, she didn't like to do anything within politics. Even when Sonic did mention this, that he himself not was much a fan of politics, but it's despite to being a king of a whole kingdom, he had to act up to mature enough to be even take place in a part of this to be a king and also to be involved in the politics, not only in his kingdom, but also to sometimes to be involved in other nearby kingdoms' politics. For example, as a trading relationships, to make sure that the peace between each next door's the neighboring countries remained a good in a good relations between the kingdom of Acorn. Even though Leda herself said that she needed some time to think if she would even accept this offer, despite that even Lupe had given her permission to be the ambassador. That same afternoon, when Leda was walking around in town, she ran into Sonia. Sonia was also had been aware, has been told about that Leda had been offered to be the ambassador. Even though Leda herself was not very still, was not much happy about this particular idea. She wanted to ask Sonia for her opinion, if she thinks that she could be an accord, if she should be the ambassador, or if they should maybe choose someone else to be the ambassador between the Kingdom of Acorn and the Wolfpack Nation. Lena to herself expressed that she doesn't even want to be involved in any sort of politics. She preferred to be neutral in any sort of things. She preferred to be not being involved in such change and this big, involving, impact things. But not only things that could also impact both the kingdom of Acorn, but also not her own nation. She didn't want to be responsible for the much as less important impact of her follow of her kind of the wolves back home because she doesn't want to be like trying to inform like to change much of their ancient traditional ways. Even Sonia herself totally understood about what Leda was coming from. But there were some part that even that Sonia maybe believed that if that she would be the ambassador, She would be allowed to travel between the two kingdoms, between the two nations at any point she wanted. She didn't have to be much of an excuse. Even when she mentioned that part, Leeta saw maybe that was a word. But she still said that she didn't want to be an ambassador. She maybe thought maybe someone else, or maybe an older member of her tribe or even her nation that could be maybe more suitable as an ambassador. Especially if someone from back in the Wolfpack Nation who had been involved as maybe one of Lupus' advisors could have been the ambassador. Because since one of her advisors was a senior and veteran member of their society, once had been involved within politics even long before the Wolfpack Nation was even formed. Even Leeta told her that to Sonia, and Sonia maybe thought that could work, but even though Sonia herself had once been even offered to be the ambassador between the two nations as well. But she declined the offer because she didn't want to be that, because she preferred to traveling around to do before match music performance to others, not only to be as a witness in politics. When she told that to Leeta, she wanted to do so herself, and she asked Leeta though once, only this question, did she like to be a farmer back home? Even though Leeta herself said that she do like her life, but sometimes being a farmer could be a very, very boring life. Despite when they don't have to do much any hard work. And even though that sometimes she did mention she missed her adventures some back when she was a freedom fighter. She missed it to be a spy. But she after a while had agreed with Sonia. If she was an ambassador, she will be allowed to travel between the two nations at any point she wanted. And especially if it wasn't she wasn't even had been called over to stay there. And that even allowed her to stay in a new metropolis for longer periods of time, which doesn't have to be involved. She doesn't have to do anything politics, even if she stays in over longer terms, in longer periods of time in new metropolis. That gave actually Lita some addition to that. So later that same evening during dinner, Sonic had asked Lita if she had considered the offer to be the ambassador. And even though that she had said that she had considered all of this, even had asked Sonia for her opinion. Both Sonic and even Sally that looked surprised she had asked his sister for her opinion. And then Sonic asked, what did he say? And she said that she probably should consider to being an ambassador, despite she once has herself been offered, but she declined it. But Lita decided to accept the offer to be the ambassador. And it was a good choice because not only to be that she could be the ambassador, she could stay in New Metropolis as long as she wanted. And even though that she didn't have to stay just there in that state, she could travel around under with Sonic or Sally to the other neighboring countries, to the other kingdoms for diplomatic mission. Even despite that was something that Leda didn't even like, but after almost about a year of being as ambassador, she slowly has actually started liking this particular work because as her experience as a spy, but also as a freedom fighter, she had managed to stop several conflicts, or at least some arguments between the kingdoms of Acorn with other countries. And even though they were just minor arguments, she tried to explain that if they could solve this problem with something more simple way, and all that problem was easily solved. When she had mentioned this to Sonia, over some point later on when she came back to New Metropolis, she was actually very happy about it. But despite this, sometimes she missed the back home though. But since she is ambassador, she could just go back home and spend some time with her family, like with her twin sister and rest of her kind, and go back to the work in New Metropolis. Even though despite she had to travel back and forward, but she doesn't have to do that almost every week. She could stay there for a longer period of times in each nation. But during this particular time, it's just because in her second year as an ambassador, Sonia and Leeta had started to be dating. But at first, it was in secret. They had no idea how Sonic and Sally would react. But since Leeta was always busy sometimes with her work as an ambassador, it stopped them from even to spend any time. But Sonia actually managed to figure out a way for them to be spend time. Sometimes they either were in Leeta's office or in the park or perhaps even in Leeta's own room where they just sometimes just small talked and just having a good time. But one day they decide to come out to Sonic and Sally that both Sonia and Leeta have been dating for a while now. When they told them, they weren't even really surprised though because they had some have a sense they were in fact involved somehow, really some either it's a friendship or a romantic way. But Sally was just happy to see that Leeta had found someone to be with. Despite that they shouldn't have kept it a secret. They would actually accept it no matter what. Even though when Liko, Leeta's twin sister, was told, she was excited but most of all overjoyed that her sister had finally found someone to be with. Even if after all this time, Leah and Sonia had started to be thinking about what if they should live together. And of course, Leeta managed to organize this place so that they could build a small house in New Metropolis so that both Sonia and Leeta could live together. Even though that the work on the house took maybe about 2 months to build, and it was the time that they required. But despite this, they could see the progress on building their joint house together, and it was worth it because Sonia's feelings for Lita had only grown stronger for each single day. But despite that happened in the past, Sonia was never had been happier to be with someone like with Lita. Because even one afternoon, when Sonic were busy with something, Sally took with Sonia for a walk in town. When Sally had asked Sonia if she would probably could if she would consider being dating or perhaps even marry Lita one day. Even though that Sonia herself was just a little bit nervous how to answer for the question. But in fact, when she said yes, that she perhaps one day marry Lita. But since they hadn't even been together for that, hadn't even been together for about even a year at that point. Even though that they decided maybe one day if they both were ready. Even even Sally mentioned that she and Sonic had been they weren't start dating after Elizabeth. Maybe they even were even dating during the battles during the war against Robotnik. But they didn't get engaged and even married sometimes even after that Robotnik was defeated and was gone forever. And even though Sonia maybe thought about this, and after they had even been together for about another 3 more years, Sonia actually asked Lita for a big question when she went to the park with her just to spend some time. But when she was asked, she had no idea. But when she was asked about if she would marry her, Lita started crying, but she said yes. She wanted to marry Sonia because she loves her more than anything, the whole world. And when they told both families, like Sonic, Sally, and Lico, they couldn't even be more happier from both of them. Sonia had asked Sally and even Nicole, who was in fact Sally's computer, but now, well, some sort of living creature, had to be helping her to organize the wedding, and Sally was asked to be Sonia's bridesmaid. And even Sally was wondered who would be Leeta's bridesmaid. But that was not a mainly problem because that was in fact going to be Liko. Liko was, since she was her twin sister, she was asked to be her bridesmaid, and it was a good choice. Within a few months, the wedding was on. On the wedding day, both Sonia and Lena couldn't have been more happier. Even despite that both were a little bit nervous but more excited to be finally getting married with the one they loved the most of all. They had invited some of their old friends from the different kingdoms, like even back home in the Wolfpack Nation. Lupe had also been invited as some among their own friends. Even despite this, it was a great deal for both Lita and Sonia to be married with someone they loved all the most in the entire world. Even after this, Lita and Sonia decided traveling around for the honeymoon in the kingdom of Acorn rather than staying in one place. And it was actually a good idea, since Sonia had to plan to be informed to perform some music shows around in the kingdom. And even later, she wanted to see more about the kingdom since she hadn't even been seeing much about her travels lately. And they spent about a month on their honeymoon. And when they came back, they decided to remain in New Metropolis as a married couple. Even though Leah still were the ambassador, she still traveled between Wolfpack Nation and Kingdom of Acorn, and sometimes even with Sally or Sonic to other kingdoms, just for a diplomatic mission. And after they had been married for about 4 years, they decided they want to have a family. So they decided to adopt some children from a local orphanage in the new metropolis. They adopted two daughters who were sisters, both aged 5 and 7. They even adopted a boy, which they were also to turn out to be their brother, who was age 3 at the time. They loved the family. They told them sometimes about their adventures, and even Lita, she told her children some of her past adventures as a spy and a secret freedom fighters, and she even told them some of their stories among their mom Sonia. Since she is a sister of the King Sonic. All their children was actually very excited to hearing all these stories. Even after all this time, Lita's love for Sonia hadn't even has only grew stronger for each single day. In her mind, this was the best thing that she had ever asked for. Even Sonia couldn't have asked for a much better partner to be with, and especially this as having Lita as her wife. And not only have Lita in her life, but have two daughters and one son together. It was the perfect life. And this was in fact something that she had wished that could have happened years ago. But she is just happy that found someone to be with, even if it was Lita. And this is how Lita and Sonia to find a true love and got a family together. The end.